Hi, this is Bishop Craig in Lansing, and this is Take One for the week of November 17. Peace be with you. Sunday, November 24th is the last Sunday of the liturgical year. It is the festival of Christ the King. I remember the good old days when the biggest controversy of Christ the King is that king is a masculine pronoun. And so some thought it would be better to call this the reign of Christ. I remember when the homiletic challenge was how to make the notion of a king relevant since we are so firmly grounded in democracy. The original purpose of the festival of Christ the King may be coming back. Pope Pius XI established this festival in 1925 in response to governments that were described as secular, atheist, and fascist. And the purpose of the festival was to give the faithful hope that while governments may rise and fall, the reign of Christ and his kingship, if you will, are eternal. And so we can hope. And so I find it interesting that this year the reading is from John's Gospel, and it is Jesus' trial before Pilate, the representative of the Roman Empire. So we have Jesus and his kingdom or reign versus Pilate and Pilate's Roman Empire or reign. As I prepare this sermon, I am going to, and I invite you to, read not only the assigned passage, but read through the end of the Passion, the crucifixion, and into the resurrection to Easter morning. Because the contrast is really there. While the Roman Empire under Pilate may seek to put Jesus to death and end his quote-unquote reign, God raises Jesus to life, and Jesus' reign is triumphant. And yet it is on the cross in John's Gospel that Jesus is enthroned. We see that by the sign over Jesus' head, which is in every gospel, Jesus of Nazareth, King of the Jews. But in John, we have Pilate's declaration, what I've written, I have written. So Pilate on the cross names Jesus as King. Very interesting. And so to talk about Christ the King, I might contrast what Jesus does in this reading and what Pilate does in this reading. I've always found it interesting that Jesus is silent before Pilate. And then it occurred to me this time that Jesus may not be recognizing Pilate's authority. You only give an explanation or testimony or an accounting to people to whom you think you are accountable. And so Jesus' silence is kind of saying, I'm not accountable to you or to Rome, right? I also find it interesting that Jesus, elsewhere in John's Gospel, is pretty clear with his I am statements. But in this instance, he's not. He says, you say that I am. What Jesus says is that he is a witness to the truth, right? And what we see on the other side are a bunch of lies. Jesus is innocent. Pilate and the people on his side are manipulative. I find it interesting that where Jesus was carrying, Pilate is mocking, dressing Jesus up as a king, having him beat up. He's a bully. He's trying to dominate. Jesus is submissive. Jesus is gentle. And while Jesus gives everyone he encounters free will, Pilate is manipulative. He manipulates the crowds, the religious leaders, into declaring we have no king but Caesar. And in so doing, Pilate manipulates them into denying the kingship, the sovereignty of God. So we really do have two different governments, two different approaches on display. And the good news is that Jesus will reign as governments rise and fall. So the movie Gladiator 2, I think, comes out this week, and that has me reading and listening and learning about all things Roman. I find the Roman Empire interesting. And one of the things that I probably knew, but I'd forgotten and learned again, is that when the Roman Empire fell, the Roman Colosseum, which is, where Christians were thrown to the lions, the Roman Colosseum became a Christian church. Now, it's not that anymore, but there is a symbol that the kingdom of Christ, the reign of Christ, remained even after Rome fell. And the reign of Christ will remain even after governments rise and fall. Our invitation is to cling to that hope, even as we see expressions of the church rise and fall. So we know that the Roman Colosseum is no longer a congregation. It's no longer a church. It's a tourist attraction. And, as I've said to congregations, all the churches that Paul started, they're not there anymore. And so congregations, institutions, seminaries, synods, they may not be here forever as they are now. That only makes sense. But the reign of Christ, the good news of the gospel, life out of death, all people being welcome, no one being deported from the kingdom of God, Jesus drawing all people to himself on the cross, all of that will remain forever. So I believe this year the festival of Christ the King, or the reign of Christ, really is a cause for hope. And I hope you find hope in Sunday's reading and proclamation. I have a full week this week, doing a lot of writing on Monday. On Tuesday, Pastor Bright and I will travel to Holland to meet with the leadership at Peace. Pastor Clay Bates has announced that he will retire at the end of July, and so we'll have a conversation about their future. On Wednesday, after staff meeting, we will, what is the phrase, muster Pastor Sprang out. I'll take his phone and his keys and all that good stuff. And then on Wednesday, the three of us will go to visit United Campus Christian Fellowship in Grand Rapids. So we're looking forward to that visit. On Thursday is the Budget Committee meeting, and on Saturday, Kathy and I head to Traverse City to be ready to preach on Sunday in Acme. So that's what the week looks like. The other thing, two other things I guess I need to remind you of is we will have a sermon, a video recorded sermon for December 29th. I've got some questions on that. You can register for that. The sermon is written, needs to be recorded, and I think the plan is to send it out on December 9. So you'll have it in plenty of time to show in congregations in the morning, and then I think we will probably release it in the afternoon for everybody to watch. So you will have a recorded sermon if you would like for December 29th. I am getting questions on display tables at synod assemblies. When can we get information on display tables at synod assemblies? So I would point you to the newsletter. The information on display tables has been on the Synod Assembly website since September. I know this because I've seen it, and I know this because people have registered for display tables and requested greetings. So that information is there, and I would draw your attention to it. And there is a deadline. I think it's in January, and the deadline is firm. The other two other things I'd say about display tables, three other things, I guess. What were they? One, we are going to have an app which we hope will invite everybody that comes to the assembly to play a bit of a scavenger hunt like we did at the youth gathering. So our plan is to have this app, and a lot of display table information or information normally put at display tables might be in the app. So that might be another way to communicate stuff. Some want us to make the display tables more prominent, and we've really looked into that for several years. And the display tables, especially with the bishop election and churchwide telling us we need a visitor section and all that, the display tables will be where they have always been, in that side room, and no amount of lobbying is going to change that. If we really need a more prominent place for display tables, then that should be communicated to Synod Council as we plan for the future. Maybe we need a different hotel. So that's the second thing I'd say about display tables. And the third thing I would say is that some people think that the staff should be calling everybody that might possibly want a display table and say, did you want a display table? So that the burden is on us to collect display tables rather than on people to register for display tables. And we're not going to do that. We're too small of a staff, and there are things like call processes to work on, right? So I am going to appoint you all volunteer Synod staff right now. And if you know somebody that's interested in a display table, call them up and tell them to register. Or if there's a display table you really, really, really want to see, if you really want Pastor Bright to bring her collection of Star Wars stuff and to lead a workshop on how Star Wars leads us to connect with Jesus. I'm making this up. I don't know that Chrissy has such a Star Wars workshop in her head. But you get the point. If there's either somebody that it's important to them to do a display table or a workshop, or there is a display table or a workshop that you'd be interested in having, you are now empowered to call them up and say to them, don't forget to register for the display table, or have you thought about doing a display table or workshop? You are all empowered. I know that we're a little reluctant to talk about Jesus, but maybe we'll talk about display tables, right? So you are empowered to do that, and I hope you will seize the power and talk about display tables. And for those of you who have, for the last several years, who have missed the deadline and said, well, we'll just call Pastor Sprang because he won't say no to us. He'll get us a display table. I say to you, go for it. This year, if you missed the deadline and want to call Pastor David Sprang and talk about display tables, please do that, because David doesn't work here anymore. So, that's, I guess, what I would say about display tables. And having said it, I'm not going to say it again. I will just invite everybody to refer to this video, to refer to the web page, to look in the newsletter, perhaps to connect with the update, where all kinds of display table information is there. And then the last thing I'll say today is, beginning on Thursday, if you have questions that normally go to the Director of Evangelical Mission, we have a new email address that is dem@mittensynod.org. If you send email there, the staff will check that probably daily, and someone will get back to you for 6 months till we figure out the Synod's future. We're not going to develop a new staff plan, but we will huddle, and someone will answer your questions. So that's what I got for you this week. I hope you're having a great week. Hope you're getting ready for Thanksgiving, and I hope you find hope in Christ the King. I'm Bishop Craig. This is Take One. May the peace of Christ be with you always. Take care.